AEW Forbidden Door. We are going to go through every single match. We're going to give an overview of it, discuss my thoughts on it, and give it a star rating 1 through 5. But before we do that, let's talk about some positives and some negatives as the show overall. I think it was a better show than All In Texas. A lot better pacing. I was only about 4.5 hours compared to like 6 hours for All In. So it didn't really drag as much. This show I actually watched in one sitting, which I rarely ever do for an AEW pay-per-view because it moved forward at such a nice pace. There were still matches that were too long for sure, but they did a better job about pacing each one of them so it didn't feel laborious. But having said that, it is still a little bit laughable to call this show a Forbidden Door when it had, 80, 90% AEW wrestlers on there and occasionally sprinkled in a few New Japan people. It's just not a Forbidden Door. I would prefer they just call it something different, but the name on the marquee is a title attraction that they're going to use to pull people in, so it's probably not going to happen, even though this isn't really a Forbidden Door pay-per-view anymore. But having said all that, very, very enjoyable show. Some low points to be sure, some just sort of mundane mid matches, but the high points really, really hit. I feel like the highs on this show were better than All in Texas. I know most people would disagree with that, but I was the low guy on Page versus Moxley for the title, and there were two matches on this card that I feel trumped anything that happened on All in Texas. But let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to go match by match. As I said, give my thoughts, give my ratings. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What'd you think of this show? What was the best match? What was the worst match? And do you agree with my star ratings? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, a like, a subscribe, turn on notifications, all that stuff that really, really does help a new channel like mine to get going. But with all of that being said, I am Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling, and let's go ahead and get into it with our opening match. The opening match on the card was Adam Copeland reuniting with Christian Cage to take on Killswitch and Kip Sabian. A very basic match, this. A match that I feel from the match graphic, a lot of people would say probably didn't deserve to be on a pay-per-view. And the match itself didn't really do anything to silence those criticisms. It was just extremely basic. It was, whatever, 15 minutes, but it really didn't feel like they got a ton in that time. And that's not to say it was bad. It was just a little bit vanilla, I guess. There were some weird dynamics in there. I like the dynamic between Christian and Cope where they're on the same page and they're getting along, but they're still sort of trying to figure out this new relationship that they have and exactly how it's going to work. I felt they did a really good job portraying that in the match. The relationship between Killswitch and Kip Sabian, I was a little bit more confused about because they had a lot of tension that led to some real miscommunications in the match. And I liked it and I didn't like it. I liked it because I feel like it really helped characterize the relationship between Cope and Cage, where they didn't win because they are tag team experts. They didn't win because they were meshing so well together. They only were able to get the win because the other team was sort of faltering apart. And it sort of shows that Cope and Christian may have gotten the win here, but they still have a long, long way to go if they're going to be a really dynamic tag team like they were in the early 2000s, if they can even reach that level again. I think that them sort of stealing a win here because of their opponent's lack of chemistry rather than overtaking an actual team, really good story beat. I really liked it. What I didn't like was the disconnect between Sabian and Killswitch. I mean, a lot of the spots where they were having the confusion, where they were doing blind tags, where they were just miscommunicating were really sloppy and often ground the match to a halt. And they just weren't incorporated very well. I can think of a couple spots that were fun, like Luchasaurus beeling Sabian into Adam Copeland. But then there were other spots, mainly towards the back half of the match, that were more like, okay, I guess I can see what you're going for, but it absolutely did not work at all. There was some fun stuff in there, when Cope speared Luchasaurus through the ropes, the crowd chanting, "Hey Christian, I want to know, oh, whoa, 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 if you'll be my dad." That was some fun stuff in there. It was a basic match with a few fun spots, a few fun highlights, a really good dynamic between one of the teams, but it was sort of hampered in other regards by a lack of chemistry between the opposing team and it just really not feeling like it belonged on pay-per-view. If this was on TV, if this was on Dynamite or Collision, I'd be much more forgiving to it than I was watching it as my pay-per-view opener. So as just something to get the crowd going, as just a fine piece of business with some good spots, I gave it 3 stars. I feel that's appropriate as it was very very basic throughout, and had a job, served that job, but didn't necessarily do anything super exciting in that process. Next up for the TNT Championship, it was Kyle Fletcher defending against Hiromu Takahashi. A slow start to this match. Fletcher was on offense for the first couple minutes. A lot of rest holds, a lot of sort of just slow, boring strikes, stuff you don't normally associate with Kyle Fletcher. So right off the rip, it was a little bit hard to get into it. But after about the first 5 minutes, it did start picking up and shaping into the match you would expect out of these two. Really did a good job about highlighting what both men have to offer. Takahashi's speed, I don't necessarily know if his charisma came through like it does often in New Japan, but it really showed him to be a great wrestler and the reason he's one of the top junior heavyweights. And Fletcher, very dominant throughout, very strong performance, some strong strikes, everything like that. It was hard hitting, often fast paced, and it was really a purpose serving match more than anything else. Get Fletcher on the card, give him a win to establish this title reign, which will hopefully go on for a long time and be one of the only true Forbidden Door esque matches on the card. Having said that, it was a great match. And I put great match in quotations because it was sort of the framework of what a great match is associated with in the 2020s. But there's this thing, I don't exactly know what to call it, if there even is a term for it, maybe just like the dilapidation of greatness in 2020s pro wrestling, where great is no longer great. You can't just throw two people out on a card like this and have them go through the spots of a great match where they start off slow, then get into some more heavy hitting, do some dives, do some apron spots towards the end, do some head spots. In this case, it was a poison rana from Takahashi and a tombstone from Kyle Fletcher before getting into some finisher kickouts and ultimately someone getting the win. That sort of basic framework you see on every single pay-per-view card across the world, whether you're looking at North America, Japan, Mexico, Britain, wherever you're watching wrestling, this sort of archetypal great match that you see repeated over and over again in the same format, it loses its luster, it loses its effectiveness, especially when you just throw two guys out there and without a story, without any history, and just expect them to have a great match. They can't really do that anymore unless you're seeing something completely mind blowing and something completely different from what you typically see. Great isn't great anymore. Great is just very good. And as time goes on, it's not even going to be very good. It's just going to be good because as you see more and more of this style of match with a lot of good action, but not a lot of heart, not a lot of character, not a lot of charisma, it just sort of folds into the sort of background miasma that all of these other matches take place in. It's hard for this to really stand out and it's hard for you to make a connection with it or really feel anything meaningful when you're watching a match like this. So the guys in it worked hard and they had a very good match. They did a lot of very good spots, a lot of very good sequences. But just because great is no longer great and it's only good to very good, you couldn't really form a bond with this match and you couldn't really get sucked into the action like you could for other matches on the card that maybe had the same format but had a more intriguing story, characters who were more in love with, relationships, dynamics that we want to see play out. This match just didn't really have it. So I gave it 3 3/4 out of 5 stars. Still a very good match, but could never really approach greatness just because great isn't great anymore. Next, for the TBS Championship, Mercedes Moné was defending against Alex Windsor from AEW, Persephone from CMLL, and Bozilla from Stardom. And as much as I complain of a lack of Forbidden Door matches where you have someone from AEW taking on someone from another company, and this was one of those matches incorporating Stardom and CMLL into there, it would have been better as a straight singles match, Monet versus Windsor. For a couple reasons. One, a title change would have been more believable because no one thought Mercedes was going to lose the title here. But if it was Mercedes one on one with Alex Windsor and you had Alex in a singles match in front of her, her hometown crowd, a title change would have been more likely, and the near falls and pins at the end would have been much more believable than they were in this match. Also, the fatal four-way structure really just didn't flatter any of the women in this match. They couldn't really have a great match because of this structure. Even though each of these women can have great matches, the multi-woman match, the over agenting sort of really sucked the life out of this match. I feel like Persephone, her single spots were very good. She had a really good spear, she had a really good dive, but when she was going into multi-woman spots where they were trying to incorporate 3 or 4 people at a single time in a spot or a sequence, it felt like she got lost. It just didn't really look that great. Alex Windsor, they didn't really capitalize enough on her for her home pops. She sort of was just a player in the match versus the babyface who everyone should be loving. So that dynamic didn't come through particularly well. Bozilla was very over, but a lot of her spots didn't necessarily look great. It was more just she was the powerhouse in this match, and that is a character archetype that really connects with a crowd, even if they've never seen that character before. But a lot of her stuff was messy. And Monet was on the back foot for most of the match. She didn't look particularly strong as the champ, even in retaining against 3 other women. I feel like a lot of character dynamics were really not properly executed in this match. And a lot of it comes to poor action because when 2 women were wrestling each other, very good. Great sometimes, even when it was just 2 people in the middle of the ring going at it. But as soon as you began to incorporate these multi woman spots where you're doing, Towers of Doom, where you're doing a submission on 2 people at once, it just got a little hokey and got a little sloppy and didn't really look good. The match, it was well structured. I don't think it necessarily did the best for each woman in there, but just in terms of a match layout, sure, it was well structured, but I think the mid action sort of let it down in most places. So I was not a big fan of this match. I didn't love the action in it. I didn't love how it represented each character in the match. I felt like it was the worst match on the card. And sort of from all fronts, from action, from booking, from agenting, I just felt like it was a real misfire. So I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. There was definitely some stuff to like in there, some stuff you could put in a highlight reel, some big moves, big spots. But as a match, I don't feel like it was particularly effective. Next, Zack Sabre Jr. was defending the IWGP Championship against Nigel McGuinness. A great match. This is what Forbidden Door should be. Creating dream matches, just unique combinations that you didn't really ever consider in your sort of, that repertoire of dream matches that every wrestling fan has in their mind. You never really considered this as a possibility, but once you see it, you're excited for it. And when it plays out in front of you, it's even better. It was a really ugly match, but in the best way possible. In contrast to the last match where the spots were supposed to be fluid and the ugliness really took you out, this match was meant to be ugly because it's supposed to tie into this real fight feel that these guys are trying to create with their grappling exchanges. They're not working collaboratively to create a pro wrestling match. They are going against each other to try to one up each other, get holds, take body parts, take limbs. and just struggling for constant back and forth change in power in the match. I thought it was a really, really great tone. And that ugliness really shined through in a lot of great ways. Nigel McGuinness with some arm ringers, throwing Zach on the mat on his shoulder, always looked really, really good. Zach's transitions into submission holds often looked a little bit messy, like he was really, really struggling to get a submission hold locked in. It sort of put over both men of, when the person putting on the hold is really a technical master to be able to put on this hold, and the person on the opposite end is really struggling to get out of it. I loved Nigel McGuinness's lariats because he would just wallop Zach and he would land straight on his head. Really made it feel just like a scrap, like a down and dirty backstreet brawl is what we were getting out of this. But there was also this artistry to it, and I feel like commentary did a really good job about putting that over, about saying Nigel McGuinness is the tactician, the guy who plans everything he does, whereas Zack Sabre Jr. is more of like a jazz artist, and he just sort of flows through the match and takes opportunities where they come. That dynamic was expressed really brilliantly in this match. It played to both men's strengths very well and highlighted both men in a really great way. And I loved the dynamic of Nigel McGuinness sort of being the older British legend and Zack Sabre Jr. being the top of the British wrestling game today, and seeing how that dynamic played out and the respect that these two guys had for each other. I thought that the craft that went into this match, the tone, the dynamic, everything really, really worked. I also like Daniel Garcia in this match. I feel like he was really well implemented to further his character without detracting from the match. He never really got involved. He was just sort of pushing the rope towards Nigel to get a rope break or pulling it away from Zach. He was on the outside, sort of just going back and forth with Sabre when Sabre went to the outside. His incorporation was really good and really subtle. It didn't hit you over the head with, Daniel Garcia's going to be turning heel. Daniel Garcia's going to a little bit of a darker place. It was just, it was just really nicely incorporated. So I love this match. I thought it was a great match, and not everything looked great. Sometimes the sloppiness did come at the expense of some of the action, where you looked at it and went, "Okay, that's not great." Like Nigel's first slingshot ricochet clothesline didn't look great, but those spots were very few and far in between. Overall, a very gritty match, a very technical match, something that was very, very fun to watch, very different from anything you got from the rest of the card, which really made it stand out, and something that really went into the strengths of both men. I love the match. I thought it was great. I gave it 4.5 stars. For the AEW Tag Team Champions, it was the Hurt Syndicate, the champions, defending against FTR and Brody King and Bandito. I feel like right off the bat, this match was hindered by it being a triple threat match. We've seen the Hurt Syndicate in a lot of triple threat matches on pay-per-views since winning the tag titles. Their one at All In was especially pretty boring, pretty egregious. It just doesn't work most of the time. They function better in singles matches, and I think this match would have been better as a singles match, either Hurt Syndicate versus FTR or Hurt Syndicate versus Brodito. Either pairing would have been better than what we got here, which was sort of just a little bit, it was fine. But they've never really figured out how to work the multi-man match style with the Hurt Syndicate, because at the beginning they were on top, they were doing extended heat sequence. It was boring. It wasn't the sort of Legion of Doom, Road Warriors, thrash metal style of match that you would hope the Hurt Syndicate would be able to have. It was just more, yeah, they do a slam, then they do a couple punches, then they pose for a little bit. It's just a little bit boring. And that's especially troubling when you have three teams in here, the quality that you do, that you couldn't really craft something special or unique because you haven't really correctly figured how to book one of the teams in it. And you also had a problem at several points in the match of having the Hurt Syndicate and Brody King in the same match, where both of those should be presented as real powerhouses, but you can't do them both at the same time necessarily. So Hurt Syndicate would have to be on top dominating Brody King. Then he would have to come back. The dynamic just didn't really work. And also FTR's inclusion in there. I did like their character work when they were making faces and taunts on the outside. But them being sort of the technical best wrestling tag team on Earth wasn't really displayed in this match. I feel like the dynamic in this match was completely off, and no team was really well represented to their fullest potential like they would have done in a singles match. And it sucks because there are politics being played in here where Hurt Syndicate didn't supposedly didn't want to take a fall to lose the titles, so you have to make it a triple threat, and the match was way worse off as a result. There were some fun stuff in there, some fun spots like Cash doing a tope immediately followed by Brody, Cash and Brody doing the big rig, Bandito's body press moonsault thing from the outside to everybody. There was some fun stuff in there, but that's all there really was to enjoy. This match was really much more of a spot fest than you would hope to imagine. You would expect when you have these three teams in here and you have so many unique dynamics that can come together, they would craft something a little bit more interesting than this, but they really just didn't. It was sort of boring throughout, and more than boring, it was sort of a letdown, honestly. um I thought it did get interesting when Ricochet and the Gates of Agony took out the Hurt Syndicate, so you're just left with FTR versus Brodito in there. And in that last couple minutes, you go, "Oh my God, we're getting a title change. Who's going to be able to win?" There's a lot of opportunities there to sort of get some real drama in, but I don't feel like they really capitalized on it. The few spots they did were messy. The ending to this match was absolutely terrible. It was really badly messed up where like Bandito was pinning one of the members of FTR and the ref started to count and then just stopped midway through for no reason and restarted the count, and then they got the pin and they won the match. Really messy. I felt like there was so much potential in this match that just wasn't executed well. It wasn't agitated properly, and there was some sloppiness in there that really got in the way of the match. Now, it wasn't a terrible match. It was still a good match. There was still good wrestling happening in front of you, but it was a disappointment to say the least. I gave it 3 stars. And that's not a terrible rating. It's like a mid, oh, that was a good, fine match rating. But when you have 6 wrestlers, the quality of the wrestlers in this match, that is really a disappointment. Next, Kazuchika Okada was taking on Swerve Strickland in what was a very good match. But for everything that there was to sort of really like about this match, there was equally something to dislike about it. Um, I really liked the story beat of Swerve coming in with a knee injury, and rather than Okada working over the knee, he used that as an opportunity to exploit the neck, which was an even more vulnerable part of Strickland's game, where, rather than him trying to get some submission holds on him with the knee, he targeted the knee early and then used that as an opportunity to hit a DDT on the steps. I thought that was a really cool story beat and really went to show the expertise of Kazuchika Okada as a wrestler, where he doesn't just take the first opportunity given to him. He works to find the best possible game plan he can make. It really puts him over as a smart wrestler. But on the same note, I thought Swerve's selling was really inconsistent. Him getting DDT'd on the steps should have been the first death nail in his loss in this match. So then everything he does, like the crunchy onto knee, the tombstone on the outside, or even just some of his lariats, should have just compounded onto that feeling that Swerve's in trouble here, man. He's really struggling. He's really going to have a tough time coming back in this. But that dynamic didn't play out. Swerve did not feel particularly more in trouble than he would on just any match on AEW Dynamite, because he didn't really consistently sell the neck throughout the course of the match. So it was a really good story beat that they just sort of let fall through their fingers. And I didn't really love that. The crowd was really hot for this match and really hot tonight, but I'll highlight it in this match. It was present in a couple other matches on the card. They were sort of quiet in some of the wrong spots when there were big spots or big counters. They were not really making that much noise, and they were just doing some little fun chants to sort of get themselves over. So the crowd was a little disappointing in this match, and they'll be very disappointing in a match, which we'll talk about in a little bit. In terms of the action, I felt that Swerve and Okada have never had great chemistry. Um, they've wrestled before on Dynamite, and it was just sort of mid. And I feel like we got that in the early moments of this match where it was Swerve going through and hitting all of the spots that Swerve normally hits in a match, just doing them all in sequence. So it didn't really feel like they were meshing well together. And then when Okada took over, he did something similar where it was just here are all the signature Okada spots rather than effectively incorporating them into the match. It didn't feel like a dynamic back and forth. It sort of felt like you were playing, a wrestling video game where one person is on top, so they're just spamming all the buttons to hit all their signature moves. And it wasn't great in the first couple minutes as a result. I wasn't really interested in it. It didn't feel unique. It just felt like every Swerve Strickland match or every Okada match that you've ever seen. That did change towards the back half of the match because in the back half, there were some absolutely electric sequences in here. I think there was like 2 or 3 sequences where, let's say Okada would go for a Rainmaker, Swerve would duck, he would counter it into a move, Okada would counter that, Swerve would counter that before Okada finally was able to hit a big move. And it was just like back and forth, really playing with the audience expectations of who's going to be able to land the first big move and potentially get a pinfall off of it in this sequence. And those sequences would go on for 15, 20 seconds. So they would really, really do a good job about pulling the audience in and making them guess about who was going to move forward in the match with the momentum. It was really, really good about playing with those and really drew me into the match. I felt like those were definitely the highlights of the match. And as you got towards the finishing sequence, they really brought that to a really nice crescendo where um, the back and forth trading of moves did start to get that nice gelling that you associate with top level great wrestling, as opposed to the first match, which sort of I do my spots, now you do your spots. The second half of the match was we are sort of fluidly incorporating our moves into each other and then finding counters for everything that the other guy has to offer before our counters run out and we get hit with a big move. I feel like it was a really, really good, I'll say great dynamic that they found within the last 5 minutes of this match. It didn't really push it to greatness for me because the first half was a little bit slow and I had some complaints about the lack of selling and things like that, but they got really, really close. It was a very, very, very good match that never quite reached greatness for me. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And to speak briefly on the Wardlow return at the end, he's going to go into a program with Swerve Strickland seemingly next. We'll see. Wardlow's great. He's got a lot of talent, all the talent in the world, but the AEW booking has just never been that consistent for him. I feel like him being in the Don Callis family is interesting, and Don Callis just sort of getting every baddie in the company to be on his side is a really cool dynamic. And I like Wardlow's inclusion in the family. I think it'll do him well going forward. And after a quick costume change, we are talking about Toni Storm successfully defending the AEW Women's Championship against Athena. I love this match, and I'm going to lavish a lot of praise on it. But first, I want to talk about 2 things that I didn't like. The first was Athena's like mannerisms, sort of the way she was playing to the crowd. They were a little bit cartoonish. Like, her interactions with Aubrey, the ref, sort of just like trying to bully her almost. Her yelling off with her head before kicking Toni Storm. Her sort of like mocking the crowd by going, yay, like that. It was all a little bit dichotomizing from the tone of the match, because how this match really should have been presented, and I don't know if it 100% was effectively in the build, was Tony Storm is getting a little bit vulnerable as champion. They told that in the match. The commentary was telling that. And in the body of the match, that was the primary story, is that Tony Storm is the most dominant champion that AEW's ever seen, but also is starting to, you know, get run down a little bit because of all the action she's in, both in terms of singles matches, tag matches, all that stuff. I'm going to sneeze. So sorry, how unprofessional of me. So Athena coming in should be a really, really credible challenger, and that's a very hard thing to do after the Monet match, to find a challenger that feels as credible as Monet. But they found that with Athena because of her lengthy run in Ring of Honor and because of this story they're telling with Tony Storm. It really felt going in like there was a 50-50 shot about who would win. And I feel like the dynamic was really, really brilliantly created, but that was not necessarily captured in the match because Athena was not portraying herself as that dominant champion who has the opportunity to upset Tony Storm. She was coming off as a little bit ham-fisted and cartoonish. That was mainly reserved to the first half of the match, though, but it was there a lot. So, though it did detract from my investment in the first part of the match, it wasn't a huge thing towards the back half when they really started going and I really started getting invested in it. Something else that sort of hampered investment was the crowd. I thought the crowd was really, really good all night, except for this match. I feel like they totally let this match down. And, maybe it's just because the crowd didn't care about it, or maybe it's AEW's chickens finally coming home to roost, because they haven't been giving a lot of attention to their women's division forever. So, the crowd naturally just doesn't build that investment to it. So here we are, they don't get invested in the matches. I think that's also a possibility, but the crowd was really quiet during this match, more so than, maybe not more so than any other match on this card, but it was really, really noticeable in this match because this match was so great, and the crowd just not being there for it, it really sort of hampered it a little bit. But the only reason it was so noticeable is because this match was so great. It was probably the best physicality we saw on the card, on a card where Zack Sabre Jr. and Nigel McGuinness really made a great match with some great physicality. And obviously, the Steel Cage main event, which we're going to get to, had some great action. This match probably was the most physical, the most hard hitting, the most just brutal of some of the stuff we've seen on the show, not because they were using forks and ladders and chairs and barbed wire like in the main event, but just because they were so stiffly striking each other, that you couldn't help but really be invested. Like I said, I love the dynamic of this match. Athena being dominant throughout and Tony really presenting as vulnerable right up until the end when Billy Starks is taken out and Athena is sort of a little bit shakier, and that gives Tony the opportunity to sort of seize victory right there. I thought it was a really great story. I wish they executed a little bit better, but really, really great story. A lot of charm as well. I love Tony Storm just hitting a Storm Zero on Zoe Starks right at the beginning. Athena throwing Tony into the barricade and having the LED monitor go out, only for later Tony to throw Athena into it and have it turn back on. Mina coming out at the end to take out Billy Starks and ultimately give Tony the win. I felt like there was so much character in this match. It deviated from the structure of a lot of other matches on this card, where it wasn't a back and forth. Athena was dominant for a good portion of this match, and that's okay. You don't need to have, what your babyface or even your champion be the most dominant through the match, so long as it informs a character and informs a story. And I feel like it is informing a character and a story here of Tony Storm is sort of getting a little bit run down. It reminds me of the Orange Cassidy story they were telling a few years back with the think it was like the international championship at that point, or the continental championship. Um, yeah, so I loved pretty much everything about this match with those two main detractions. I feel it was perfectly structured and near perfect execution with just those two qualms. One, the fault of the competitors, and one, the fault of the crowd. So probably four and three quarters, maybe could have even gotten close to five territory if not for those little nitpicks. But as it was, still a really, really great match. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I apologize if my voice sounds a little weird, but I'm dealing with some pretty rough allergies right now, so it's making my voice a little phlegmy. I apologize. In our semi-main event, we had Hangman Adam Page defending the World Championship successfully against MJF, and this was a true classic in pretty much every sense. We going in knowing the two stipulations that MJF was not executing his casino gauntlet thing contract, um, and also that the title can change hands on disqualification or countouts. You know that there is going to be some sort of shenanigans booking throughout the course of this match. And normally AEW does very, very poorly with shenanigans. They just never really measure it right. But this match was absolutely pitch perfect. I felt like it was really fantastic in that regard. And not only that, they really incorporated the physicality that defined the Hangman versus MJF feud earlier this year into this match. And over the entire course of the match, they did a really good job about escalating the violence because this match was 30 minutes or whatever it was. Continuously upgrading the violence as you go through a match like that is a very difficult thing to do. But I feel like they did a really fantastic job of it. And a really great job about incorporating both men's characters. Hangman Page being able to sort of see through a lot of MJF's cheating, wily ways and perfectly mixing the heart on your sleeve babyface with the badass cowboy character. And this might be one of my favorite MJF performances of all time. The only one I can really think offhand that I liked more was the Danielson 60-minute Iron Man match at Revolution 23, it might have been. That's the only one I can really think that outdoes this. MJF was so good in this match, especially in the last 5 minutes where he is really just throwing everything at the wall he can think of to try to pick up the win. And when none of it goes his way, you can see him getting more and more desperate. I think they put forward that idea so brilliantly, and it was so well executed. They were inch perfect in everything they were going for. But as with all matches, I'm going to be a little persnickety jerk. I do have some qualms with it. I don't feel like the stipulation of no DQ or you can lose the title on a DQ or a countout was really effectively incorporated. I felt like there were some moments in the match where it just didn't really work when Hangman Page was on the verge of getting disqualified because he was beating MJF down in the corner, about to hit him with a chair. And it just doesn't really make sense. It doesn't keep in line with the Hangman character we've seen coming up to this. It reminded me of Punk versus Jericho at Mania. I don't remember. Maybe Mania like 27. No, not 27. Maybe 28. Um, where they had the same stipulation and Punk was doing the same thing where he was doing things his character wouldn't normally do in matches to match the stipulation, going sort of overboard in the physicality to the point where he might get disqualified when he would never do that in a normal match. I feel like that was present here a little bit, and it was a little bit you know. But outside of a few spots, it never really factored into the match that much. Like I don't really know why that stipulation was included because it didn't hamper MJF's cheating. Like he still cheated a ton in the last 5 minutes. So I just didn't really know why that was there. And also there were some expectations that something else was going to happen after the match, and that's not like me fantasy booking something. I feel like that was realistic expectations that were set up by the booking, not having MJF cash in his title opportunity. So you would envision he loses, then immediately cashes in to get another match, or this breakup with the Hurt Syndicate that was so rushed and so weird that you felt like it was a dupe and the Hurt Syndicate was going to come out at the end. It just felt like AEW was setting up something more that they never really cashed in on. So at the end, you were sort of going, rather than going, oh, that was an incredible match, you were going, that was a great match. What else do you got? What else is coming? Oh, nothing. Hangman Page just won. It was a little bit of a flat ending because it really felt like they were setting something else up that just never got, capitalized on. Um, but really, those are the only things that are holding it back from being a 5-star match, in my opinion, from being a perfect match. Because I felt like everything else in the match really, really worked. If you had not included the stipulation about losing on DQ or count out, and not built up MJF doing something else at the end of the match as much, I feel like this could have been a 5-star match. But as it was, so many twists and turns, so much great action, so much great characterization for both men. I gave it 4 3/4 out of 5 stars. And in our main event, we had a 5-on-5 steel cage match. It was the team of Will Ospreay, Kenny Omega, Kota Ibushi, Hiroshi Tanahashi, and Darby Allin taking on Jon Moxley, Claudio Castagnoli, Gabe Kidd, and the Young Bucks. This wasn't a perfect match, but it was pretty damn close. It was about as close to 5 stars as you can get without being 5 stars. I'll tell you right off the bat, it was 4 3/4 stars. And rather than going through every little spot, I'm just going to highlight what I liked about each person in the match. And I feel like that will effectively get over why this match really, really worked. So let's start with the heels. Starting with the Young Bucks, I feel like they brought comedy to the match. That really made it entertaining. Their entering to Hanson was really great. Thinking that they were going to pour thumbtacks on the ring, but it being gummy bears, really, really fun. And then they did some comedy spots with the gummy bears, but also they were really the glue to all of the action. Everything was sort of centered around them. All the big spots really involved them. And you could tell they had their hands in this match a lot because they are sort of the best in the world right now about creating matches like this. So loved everything they did. Gabe Kidd, a little bit underutilized in the match, not really, incorporated into the story of the spots as much as he could have been. But a lot of his mannerisms were over the top and goofy, like when he was coming to the ring and walking on all fours. So maybe it's a good thing. Like, I love Gabe Kidd, but sometimes he can just be way too much of a cartoon bad guy that you would see in like Dick Tracy or something like that. Claudio, perfect powerhouse, really good swings, military press to the outside, really good European uppercuts, strong stuff throughout. Always felt like, okay, the baby faces are getting some momentum. Oh, no, Claudio's here to derail them. Really good utilization of him in the match. And then Jon Moxley, which was probably the best part of the match for me, really brutal throughout, like, really just felt unnecessarily violent in this match. Like, he lived up to the stipulation more than anyone else, and you sort of knew he would because that's who Jon Moxley is, but I feel he just played his role perfectly. The fork to Darby's ear being brutal, chair shots, paradigm shifts to everybody, especially Will Ospreay at the end. I feel like he was my favorite part of the match. Honestly, something else I loved going over to the babyface team, Kota Ibushi, who I haven't been a huge fan of since his move to AEW. His selling in this match was just insane. Like a ladder to the face earlier where he just got walloped, super kicks. He took him right on the chin. A DDT on the apron. He just took it right on his head. Like, he was throwing himself into this match to really make it seem more impactful. I loved Kota Ibushi in this match. For Tanahashi, many spots were the perfect incorporation of old man Tanahashi, getting mega heat when he blew up, and then some fun spots when he was able to take over and start hitting signature moves on everyone, and especially when he's like going to climb the ladder, but the rest of the baby faces have to be like, you're gonna die if you do that. Don't do that. So really good incorporation. Even if he was slow at a lot of the times because it is old man Tanahashi. So when he was on offense, it didn't always look great, but when he was getting beat up, perfect. He is the absolute kind of foil babyface that you want in that position. Darby delivered in the big spots and getting the piss beat out of him like he would. Like, that is his role in this match, is to do some absolutely incredible big spots and to really, really take a lot of the brutality to put over how violent this match is. Sorry, I keep sniffling, but I'm like really just the allergies are really getting me. Um, Omega, good team leader. He was the person who was always like checking in on his teammates to make sure they were good. He was sort of one of the emotional drives of the babyface team. And then Ospreay, who was the main heart of the team, leading them in offense, constantly helping his friend, and eventually getting brutalized in the end to really put over the heels as in the brutality of this match. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I feel like the only detractions were Tanahashi being a little bit slow, Gabe Kidd being a little bit too over the top, and there were a few spots in there that I felt were a little bit too scripted, like everyone hitting their big moves sequentially. So one person would come in, hit their signature move, then another person, another. It was just a little bit too scripted. Everyone hitting apron moves one after the other, a little bit too scripted. It sort of altered the feel of the match a little bit when it was supposed to feel really violent and chaotic and then got into this really scripted fight. It sort of took me out of it a little bit, but overall, I would say it was an absolutely fantastic, this melody of comedy and violence and big spots and emotion. There was just so much in this match to love. Like I said, it wasn't perfect, so I can't give it 5 stars. But 4 3/4, closest match to 5 stars on this card. I didn't like Blood and Guts this year necessarily. Did they even do Blood and Guts? No, Anarchy in the Arena. I didn't necessarily love that. I didn't love Hangman versus Moxley, but I feel like this is the best AEW sort of all out brawl, violent match that they've done this year. I absolutely loved it. 4 3/4 stars. And those are my thoughts on the show. I liked it way more than All In. I felt like the heights hit bigger because, like I said, I wasn't a fan of Page versus Moxley. I feel like the steel cage match, Page versus MJF, Athena versus Tony Storm, and Zack Sabre Jr. versus Nigel McGuinness. All great matches that you should go out of your way to see. Let me know if there's anything I slept on this card, if there's something that I should have given a little bit more attention to, maybe a take that I had that you don't necessarily 100% agree with. Let me know that down in the comments below. And while you're down there, leave a like, leave a subscribe, all that stuff that really helps a new channel like mine to grow. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Really means the world to me. All the support I'm getting, all the the comments, and even though it's not, I'm getting one comment per video, maybe. I love interacting with you guys. I love talking to you. So please, if you have questions, if you want to know my thoughts on something, or if you just want to get a conversation going, leave a comment down below. Thank you once again for watching. I've been Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling, and I will see you next time.